I still remember the moment my family decided I no longer had a place in the house my grandparents left behind. There was no shouting, no argument, no dramatic confrontation. Just smiles, too calm, too practiced. My parents stood side by side like they always did when a decision had already been made. My sister hovered near the doorway, scanning the space with quiet ownership, as if she were already rearranging the furniture in her head. "We took care of the paperwork," she said lightly, almost cheerfully. "The house is in my name now. You'll need to be out by Friday." No one asked how I felt. No one asked what I had done in the weeks after my graduation. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, stepped aside, and let them walk away believing they had won. What they didn't know was that their confidence was built on an assumption that I was still the same person I had always been. My name is Sophia. Growing up, I learned very early how to disappear without actually leaving. In my family, affection was conditional and attention was currency. My younger sister never seemed to run out of either. She was celebrated without effort. Her wants were treated like necessities. Mine were framed as opportunities to learn independence. So I learned to be quiet. To agree quickly. To accept disappointment without showing it. From the outside, we looked like a normal, close-knit family. Holiday photos. Weekend dinners. Smiles that convinced neighbors everything was fine. But inside our home, love flowed in one direction, and I learned to survive on whatever was left. The only place that ever felt different was my grandparents' house. A modest place in a coastal town where the air always smelled faintly of salt and pine. You could hear the waves at night if the wind was right. The porch boards creaked in familiar patterns. Wind chimes tapped softly when the breeze came through just right. There, no one rushed me. No one compared me. My grandmother listened as if every word mattered. My grandfather trusted me with small tasks at first, then bigger ones as the years passed. As they aged, I was the one who showed up, not just for holidays, but for ordinary days, the quiet ones. Errands. Appointments. Bills when memory started to slip. My parents and sister visited too, but mostly when it was convenient. Mostly when something needed to be discussed. I told myself that was just how families worked. Before we continue the story, please tell me in the comments what your name is and where you're listening from, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. By the time I graduated, my grandparents were gone. But their house still felt like the only place I'd ever truly belonged. So when questions about the house started coming up, they didn't feel innocent. They felt familiar. And for the first time in my life, I stopped ignoring that feeling. Because I could sense it coming, the same pattern, the same quiet setup, and this time I wasn't sure I was willing to step aside again. What my family didn't realize was that while they were planning how to take the house, I was already preparing to make sure they never could. At first, the conversations were subtle enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. The questions came wrapped in concern, disguised as casual curiosity. My mother brought it up one evening over tea, her voice light, her eyes fixed on her cup instead of my face. "So, what are you thinking of doing with the house?" she asked. "It's a lot for one person to handle." A few days later, my father followed up, his tone practical, reasonable. "Property taxes. Maintenance costs. Insurance. You don't want to get overwhelmed," he said, like he was offering advice instead of testing boundaries. My sister's approach was different. She started dropping by unannounced, always with a reason that sounded harmless. Returning something our mother had forgotten. Picking up a box she claimed was hers. Every time she came in, her eyes wandered, down the hallway, across the shelves, toward the small desk where I kept documents I considered boring and unimportant. "You still have all the utilities set up properly?" she asked once, smiling. "Bills, payments, that kind of thing. Just curious." I told myself not to overthink it. That families asked questions. That concern didn't always mean control. But the feeling in my stomach refused to go away. The comments became more coordinated after that. Always framed as fairness. As unity. As honoring my grandparents' wishes. It wouldn't be right for one person to keep everything. They would have wanted it shared. We're just trying to help you think long term. I recognized the language immediately. It was the same careful phrasing my parents used whenever something needed to be taken quietly, without resistance. The same tone that turned decisions into obligations and pressure into what's best for everyone. What finally broke through my denial wasn't a single comment, it was a memory. Years earlier, I'd watched my parents borrow money from a relative for something they called urgent. They promised to repay it quickly. Then weeks passed. Months. The subject slowly disappeared. When the relative finally asked about it, she was labeled difficult. Ungrateful. Greedy. I remembered how easily the story had flipped. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed every recent conversation. The smiles. The timing. The sudden interest in details that had never mattered before. It stopped feeling random. It started feeling strategic. The next morning, I took an extended lunch break and walked into a quiet office downtown. The lawyer I met specialized in estates and trusts. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything, the house, the family dynamics, the questions that wouldn't stop circling back. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said something that settled deep in my chest. If they believe they're entitled to this property, he said calmly, waiting only makes it easier for them. He explained my options clearly. What could be protected? What couldn't? What happened when people acted first and asked permission later? I didn't hesitate. By the time I stepped back outside into the sunlight, something fundamental had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. And the most important choice I made next was deciding not to tell my family a single word about what I'd just done. I didn't warn my parents. I didn't confront my sister. I didn't change my routine or my tone. If anything, I became more predictable. I answered calls. I showed up when invited. I smiled when my sister made those half-joking comments about the house like she was already picturing herself there permanently. They mistook my calm for uncertainty. In reality, I had learned something important. People reveal more when they think you aren't paying attention. So I let them talk. I let them assume. And I let them move closer, believing I was still standing exactly where they'd left me. The paperwork itself wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No emotional speeches. Just dates, signatures, and careful explanations. The lawyer walked me through every page, explaining what each section meant and why it mattered. An irrevocable trust isn't something you rush. It's designed to be slow, deliberate, and difficult to undo. That was the point. The house. The remaining accounts. Everything my grandparents had worked for was placed somewhere it couldn't be reinterpreted later. I listened more than I spoke. I asked questions. I took notes. And when it was finished, I walked out holding a thin folder that looked almost insignificant, despite the weight it carried. After that, I went back to my life as if nothing had changed. My parents' calls became warmer. Almost nostalgic. My mother talked about family traditions she hadn't mentioned in years. My father brought up how nice it would be if everyone could come together again. My sister joked openly about renovations she'd make if the house were ever hers, watching my reaction carefully. I gave them nothing. No arguments. No reassurance. No promises. Just politeness. Enough to keep everything smooth. Behind the scenes, I started documenting everything. Dates. Messages. The way questions were phrased. The assumptions buried inside casual conversation. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just wanted a record in case one found me. And eventually, the tone shifted. The first sign was urgency. My mother called one afternoon, her voice tight beneath a layer of forced calm. "We need to talk about the house," she said. "Soon." It can't wait. That same evening, my sister texted. Short. Confident. We'll come by this weekend. It's easier to explain in person. I didn't ask what needed explaining. By then, I already knew. They believed my silence meant weakness. That my patience was fear. That because I had always stepped back before, I would do it again. They thought the ending had already been written. I let them believe that. When they finally arrived, smiling too much and standing just a little too close together, I recognized the look immediately. It was the look of people who think the decision has already been made, and that they're just there to inform you of it. They spoke carefully at first. Then more boldly. Then with certainty. They weren't asking. They were announcing. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct them. I just listened. Because while they believed they were closing the story, the real outcome had been sealed weeks earlier. And when they returned, this time with proof in their hands, they had no idea how close they were to finding out the truth. They came on a gray morning, the kind where the sky hangs low and the ocean looks flat, like it's holding its breath. I was already on the porch when their car pulled into the gravel drive. I noticed small details first, the crunch of tires, the way my sister stepped out before anyone else, her smile already in place. My parents followed, shoulders squared, standing close together as if they'd rehearsed this moment. My sister didn't waste time. We got everything finalized, she said, lifting a neat stack of papers. The house is officially in my name now. It just made things cleaner. She tilted her head, almost apologetic. You'll need to be out by Friday. My mother nodded, voice soft, practiced. It's not personal. This just makes sense for the family. My father added, you have your own life in the city. This place needs someone who can really manage it. They were smiling. All of them. Like they were delivering good news. I glanced at the papers without taking them. The stamps looked official. The ink was fresh. Confidence radiated off every page. They believed this was done. Something settled inside me, not anger, not fear. Clarity. Okay, I said. That single word relaxed them instantly. My sister exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. My mother's shoulders dropped. They mistook my calm for surrender. I stepped aside so they could leave. My sister brushed past me, satisfaction written all over her face. We'll be back soon, she said. Probably with movers. It's easier if we handle everything at once. I nodded. I even smiled. 2 days later, they returned. This time, they brought a moving truck. It pulled in behind their car, white and loud against the muted sky. 2 movers jumped down, stretching, already scanning the house like it was just another job on the schedule. My parents looked energized. My sister was glowing. This should be quick, she said, clapping her hands once. We'll have you out before lunch. I stepped onto the porch, but I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was a man they didn't recognize. Middle-aged. Calm. Dressed neatly, holding a thick folder under one arm. The air shifted instantly. The movers slowed. One of them stopped mid-step. My sister's smile faltered. My parents exchanged a glance. The man stepped forward. I need to confirm who I'm speaking with, he said evenly, listing their names without hesitation. I'm here regarding the legal status of this property. My father frowned. And you are? The man opened the folder just enough for them to see the documents inside. This house was placed into an irrevocable trust several weeks ago, he said. Sophia is the sole trustee. Silence hit like a wall. My sister laughed sharply. That's not possible. We have paperwork. I've reviewed it, he replied calmly. My mother stepped forward. There must be a mistake. There isn't, he said. Any attempt to transfer ownership without authorization from the trustee is legally void. The color drained from my sister's face. One of the movers cleared his throat. So, should we wait? No, the man said, I's never leaving my family. You should not proceed. That was the moment their confidence cracked, and the truth finally caught up with them. My father's jaw tightened. Are you accusing us of something? He asked, his voice sharp now, stripped of its earlier warmth. I'm stating facts, the man replied evenly. Any further attempt to take possession of this property could escalate into a legal matter. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My sister turned to me, eyes wide, panic breaking through her composure. You did this? She asked. You went behind our backs? I met her gaze without flinching. I protected what wasn't yours to take. My mother's voice cracked. After everything we've done for you, how could you do this to us? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. You showed up with movers, I said quietly. You told me I was out by Friday. You didn't ask. You decided. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. The confidence he'd walked in with was gone, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. The man handed my father a copy of the notice. This documents today's attempted transfer and serves as a formal warning. Behind him, the movers were already backing away. One murmured an apology. Another climbed back into the truck without waiting for instructions. My sister stood frozen, the papers in her hands sagging like they'd suddenly lost all weight. This isn't over, she said weakly. I nodded once. That part is up to you. They didn't argue anymore. They didn't threaten. They didn't plead. They just left. I watched from the porch as their car rolled back down the gravel drive, the moving truck following close behind. The sound of tires faded. The gravel settled. Silence returned. The man beside me closed his folder. They'll think twice before trying something like that again. I thanked him and watched as he drove away, leaving me alone on the porch. The ocean looked the same. The wind sounded the same. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for what they might take next. I stayed there for a long moment, breathing in the salt air, feeling the steadiness of the house beneath my feet. I realized then that standing up for myself didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet. Solid. Days passed without a single call. No texts. No sudden visits masked as concern. The silence was unfamiliar, but it wasn't uncomfortable. A week later, a formal letter arrived from their attorney. Short. Stiff. Withdrawing every claim connected to the house and requesting no further contact. I read it once, then filed it away. Relatives began reaching out after that. Some awkwardly apologized. Others stayed silent. I didn't chase either response. I wasn't interested in rebuilding bridges that had only ever led one way. What mattered was that the noise had finally stopped. And in that quiet, I understood something my grandparents had always known: peace doesn't come from keeping everyone else comfortable. It comes from drawing a line, and holding it. But the real aftermath didn't begin that day, it started when I finally returned to the house alone. I went back to the coastal house on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I parked in the same spot my grandparents always had, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment longer than necessary. There was no rush this time. No knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Just stillness. When I unlocked the front door, the familiar scent of old wood and lavender met me immediately. My grandmother used to tuck small sachets into drawers and closets, convinced they kept memories intact. Sunlight spilled across the floor in long, soft lines, exactly the way it always had. I walked through the house slowly, room by room. Not checking for damage. Not preparing for confrontation. Just existing in the space without tension in my shoulders or the instinct to listen for footsteps behind me. The trust had done its job. The records were clean. The line was clear. For the first time, I understood what safety actually felt like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries that held, even when tested. I made tea and carried it out to the porch, settling into one of the old chairs my grandfather refused to replace. The tide moved in and out, steady and unbothered. The wind chimes tapped softly, just like they always had. The house no longer felt like something I'd had to defend. It felt like something I was allowed to keep. As the days passed, the silence from my family remained. No attempts to explain. No sudden warmth. Just distance. And I realized I wasn't grieving it. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. I wasn't wondering what I could have said differently. The quiet wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I thought about all the years I'd spent shrinking myself to avoid conflict. All the times I'd stepped aside because it felt easier than standing firm. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned that being accommodating was safer than being honest. But standing there, watching the waves roll in, I understood how wrong that had been. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty. It's clarity. I spent that evening sorting through old drawers and cabinets, finding handwritten notes, faded photos, small objects my grandparents had kept for reasons only they understood. Each item felt like a reminder, not of loss, but of intention. They had built a life. They had chosen what mattered. And in their own quiet way, they had trusted me to honor that. As the sky darkened, I stood on the porch again, listening to the ocean settle into the night. I wasn't holding my breath anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next demand, the next guilt-laced request disguised as love. I was standing exactly where I belonged. And that's when I realized this story wasn't really about a house, it was about what happens when you finally stop shrinking. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how much energy I used to spend anticipating conflict that never came anymore. My phone stayed quiet. No surprise messages. No forced check-ins pretending to care. The absence felt strange at first, like walking into a room and realizing the noise you'd learned to tune out was finally gone. That's when the weight of it really hit me. I hadn't just protected a house. I'd stepped out of a role I'd been assigned without ever agreeing to it. Growing up, I'd been the flexible one. The understanding one. The one who didn't push back because that's just how they are. I'd confused endurance with strength, silence with maturity. But none of that had ever earned me respect, only access. Once that access was gone, so was the performance. I heard bits of the fallout through distant relatives. My sister was angry. My parents were embarrassed. The story shifted depending on who was telling it, but the ending stayed the same. They had lost control of something they believed was already theirs. No one asked how I was doing. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. I started spending more time at the house, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I fixed small things my grandfather had always meant to get around to. Replaced a loose porch board. Cleaned the gutters before the season changed. Simple tasks, grounding ones. Each small repair felt symbolic. Not of fixing the past, but of caring for the present. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. Stopped softening my words to make others comfortable. The boundary held, not because I defended it constantly, but because I no longer stepped over it myself. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water in copper and gray, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my sister. Not at my parents. Anger requires engagement, and I was done engaging. What I felt instead was distance, clean, intentional distance. And with it came relief. I thought about how many people stay stuck in situations that drain them because leaving feels selfish. How often we're taught that protecting ourselves is betrayal. But standing there, listening to the waves roll in without interruption, I knew that wasn't true. You're allowed to outgrow dynamics that only work when you stay small. You're allowed to protect what matters to you, even if the people questioning it share your last name. This wasn't revenge. It was resolution. And the quiet that followed wasn't loneliness. It was peace. But the most important lesson came afterward, when I finally understood why my grandparents trusted me with everything they left behind. It took time, but eventually I understood what my grandparents had seen long before I ever did. Their trust wasn't about favoritism or about choosing sides. It was about consistency. About who showed up when there was nothing to gain. Who listened when things were quiet. Who treated care as a responsibility, not a performance. They hadn't left me the house by accident. They left it to someone who wouldn't use it as leverage, or a trophy, or proof of superiority. They left it to someone who understood that protection doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like preparation. For most of my life, I believed strength had to be loud. That standing up for yourself meant confrontation, raised voices, dramatic endings. But what I learned through all of this was simpler, and harder. Real strength is quiet. It's knowing when to act without announcing it. It's setting boundaries before they're needed. It's choosing yourself without asking for permission. The house still stands just where it always has, weathered but steady. The porch still creaks in the same places. The wind chimes still tap softly when the breeze comes through just right. Nothing about it needed to change for it to be worth protecting. I did. I no longer measure my choices by how they'll be received by people who only valued me when I was convenient. I don't negotiate with guilt disguised as family obligation. And I don't confuse peacekeeping with peace anymore. The house still stands just where it always has, weathered but steady. The porch still creaks in the same places. The wind chimes still tap softly when the breeze comes through just right. Nothing about it needed to change for it to be worth protecting. I did. I no longer measure my choices by how they'll be received by people who only valued me when I was convenient. I don't negotiate with guilt disguised as family obligation. And I don't confuse peacekeeping with peace anymore. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that boundaries don't destroy families, entitlement does. And protecting what was entrusted to you isn't cruelty. It's respect. For yourself, and for the people who believed in you enough to trust you with something meaningful. Some relationships don't end with shouting or slammed doors. They end with silence. And sometimes, that silence is the clearest answer you'll ever get. Standing on the porch as the sky darkens and the tide settles into its steady rhythm, I feel something I spent years chasing without realizing it. I feel safe. Not because nothing bad can happen, but because I finally trust myself to handle it if it does. And that, more than the house, is what my grandparents really left me.